The screech of tires was loud. A black Bentley halts. Doors swing open. A tall man in a spotless white kaftan steps out, flanked by two private security men. His red cap is tilted slightly as he scans the underbridge with panic in his eyes. His gaze stops, right where a teenage boy kneels beside a frail, elderly man, feeding him spoonfuls of jollof rice and chicken from a plastic plate. The man in the kaftan gasps. His mouth trembles. "Dad?" Jacob freezes. He slowly looks up at the man towering over them. The spoon in his hand shakes. "We've been looking for you for 3 months," the man cries out, his voice cracking as he rushes forward, dropping to his knees beside the old man. The bodyguards are stunned. Cars zoom by on the expressway behind them, but to Jacob, the world has gone silent. The man grips the old man's dusty, wrinkled hands and calls out again, "Dad! Baba! It's me! Andrew! It's your son!" Jacob just fed a dying man for the 3rd time today. And now? Someone is calling him Baba? This dying man is a billionaire? Everything begins to blur as the stranger in the kaftan turns to Jacob with wet eyes. "How did you find him?" he demands. But Jacob's lips can barely move. 3 months. Earlier, Jacob's life ended the same day his parents vanished. It was a Thursday. Ordinary. Humid. The day started with laughter. His mother, Sophia, was getting ready to head to the market. Her thrift business had been her lifeline for years. His father, Uche, used to drive a taxi around Lagos until someone stole the car he borrowed. Since then, he joined Sophia in the market to help her. That morning, Jacob had helped his mother fold clothes into the old sack bag while she hummed. "Take care of the house," she said with a kiss on his forehead. He waved them off, standing by the doorway. He never saw them again. That night, when they didn't return, he waited. The next morning, nothing. By evening, news filtered in. 2 adults had been kidnapped along Mile 2 route. No ransom call came. No updates. No bodies. Just silence. Jacob tried to stay strong, but days turned to weeks. The landlord became impatient. He didn't care that Jacob was just 18 and alone. "I'm not running a charity," the man screamed as he threw Jacob's bag outside. So Jacob left with nothing but a wrapper to keep warm, a torn bag, and a single photo of himself with his parents. That photo? His only treasure. Oshodi Underbridge wasn't kind, but it didn't kill him. Jacob started carrying blocks at construction sites. The work was hard, heavy, and the pay? Small, but it kept him from begging. Each evening, he'd buy rice, sometimes plain, sometimes with meat than curl under the bridge, and stare at the photo of his family until sleep took him. One evening, returning from work, something changed. He noticed a body by the roadside, not far from the underbridge. At first, he thought the man was dead. But then the old man groaned. He was old, very old, maybe 70. His hair was tangled, grey and long. His beard, unshaven and wild. His clothes, torn and stained. He was shaking, barely breathing. People walked past him. Nobody stopped. Jacob did. He knelt beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" No answer. Jacob didn't think. He lifted the man's skin and bones and carried him under the bridge. He laid him gently on a blanket of torn carton. Then, with the little money he had, he bought jollof rice and a sachet of water. He fed him slowly. That night, Jacob used his only wrapper to cover the man. The next day, Jacob didn't go to the construction site. He stayed with the man, fed him again this time. He had to use his small savings to buy rice and a piece of chicken. By the 3rd day, the man opened his eyes. His lips quivered. "Water!" Jacob rushed out and bought bottled water. By evening, the old man could sit up. He smiled weakly, gripping Jacob's hands. But there was something strange. He didn't remember who he was. Not his name. Not his family. Not even where he came from. "You can't stay here forever." Jacob didn't know what to do. He was scared. This man was recovering. Yes, but how could he keep feeding someone when he could barely feed himself? Still, something about the man reminded him of his father. His voice, his smile, the way he blinked slowly when he was tired. So Jacob continued. Each day he worked, and each evening he fed the man. He bathed him, talked to him, made him laugh. The man began calling him my son. Jacob smiled whenever he heard that. One day, after eating at the underbridge, Jacob joked, "You must have been a big man before, Baba." The old man chuckled. "Big man that can't remember his name?" They both laughed. On the 12th day of caring for him, Jacob used his last money to buy jollof rice and a plastic bottle of water. It was Baba's favorite. They were eating together, smiling under the bridge, when the black Bentley pulled up. Jacob thought it was the environmental security or police. He quickly hid the bottle, but the moment the man in white stepped out, everything changed. Now, as the man Andrew holds his father's hands, Jacob feels a cold fear in his chest. Was he in trouble? "I don't understand," Jacob stammers. Andrew turns to him, his voice choked with emotion. "You don't know who this man is?" Jacob shakes his head. "This is Donald Andrew," Andrew says. "He's my father, the billionaire CEO of Donald's Tech. He went missing 3 months ago. We searched everywhere. We thought he was dead." Jacob stares in shock. "I found him near the road. He was almost dead." Andrew steps forward and pulls Jacob into a tight hug. "You saved him. You saved my father." He looks Jacob in the eye. "You're coming with us. Now." The leather seat of the Bentley was soft. Too soft. Jacob sat at the edge, holding tightly to his worn bag, afraid to touch anything. The air conditioning whispered through the car vents, brushing against his skin like something out of a dream. Beside him, Baba lay asleep, his head resting on a pillow Andrew had gently placed beneath it. His breathing was steady now, peaceful. The bodyguard sat quietly in the front seat, occasionally glancing at Jacob through the rearview mirror, curious. Andrew was on a call. His voice was low but urgent. "Yes, I found him. I found him. Call Juliana. Tell her to prepare his room. Yes, she's alive. Yes, someone saved him. A boy. A homeless boy." Jacob's fingers tightened around the strap of his old bag. He wasn't used to being seen. The mansion. The iron gates opened slowly, revealing a driveway paved with interlocking stones and flowers on both sides. Tall palm trees lined the path, dancing in the late evening breeze. The mansion stood proudly at the Centera, white, multi-story building with long glass windows that shimmered under the Lagos sun. As the car rolled in, staff rushed out: nurses, security men, housekeepers. "Oh my God," a woman cried, running barefoot across the tiles. She dropped to her knees beside the car as the door opened. "Papa?" It was Juliana Andrews' wife. Her gel had fallen off. Her face was soaked in tears. Jacob watched from the corner of the seat as they gently carried Baba into the house. No one even noticed him. He slowly stepped out of the car. His slippers made a soft sound against the tiles. He looked around like a child lost in a shopping mall. This didn't feel real. "He's with me." A hand touched his shoulder. Jacob turned. It was Andrew. "Come," he said. "You're with me." Inside the mansion, everything smelled clean and expensive. The tiles were white and glossy. Gold-framed photos lined the walls, Baba in suits, Baba shaking hands with presidents, Baba standing beside luxury cars. It was like walking into a museum of a man Jacob had only known under a bridge. One of the nurses glanced at Jacob and whispered to another. He caught it. "Is that the boy who found him?" He suddenly felt like shrinking. Andrew led him to a small lounge. "Sit." Jacob sat, still hugging his bag. Andrew crouched in front of him. "Tell me everything." So Jacob told him from the day he found Baba lying by the road, to feeding him with jollof rice and covering him with his only wrapper. He talked slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor. When he finished, Andrew stood up, walked to the window, and stared outside. Then, without warning, he turned and said, "You're not going back there." Jacob's heart skipped. "But you don't belong here," he said quietly. Andrew walked back to him. "You belong anywhere someone calls you family. You saved my father when no one else did. He doesn't remember us yet, but he remembers you. That means something." Jacob looked down again. Andrew nodded toward a hallway. Come, you'll sleep here tonight. The room had air conditioning, a real bed, clean sheets, a television on the wall. Jacob stood at the door, afraid to enter. His wrapper and photo felt too dirty for this space. A housekeeper gently took his bag. I'll wash these for you, she said kindly. He panicked. No, please, me photo is in there. It's all I have. She opened the bag carefully, removed the photo, and handed it to him. Keep it. Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of his parents. I wish you were here, he whispered. He didn't know when he fell asleep. The next morning, he woke up to soft knocking. It was Andrew. Come, let's go to the hospital. They had moved Baba to a private hospital in Victoria Island. Inside the VIP wing, doctors and nurses treated him like royalty, but still, Baba didn't remember. He spoke. He smiled. But when Andrew called him Dad, he just nodded politely. Only Jacob's face made him light up. My son, he'd say, gripping Jacob's hand, you always bring jollof rice. One day, Andrew asked Jacob to bring his old wrapper. Why? Jacob asked. Just bring it. He took it into the room and gently placed it on Baba's lap. Baba touched it slowly. His fingers trembled. He looked up. Jollof rice, chicken, wrapper, he whispered. Andrew's eyes widened. Papa? But Baba's face fell again blank. Still, it was progress. 2 weeks later, Baba's recovery was slow but steady. Jacob never left his side. He sat beside him, fed him, told him jokes, wiped his mouth, sang him songs. And then, one quiet afternoon, as the sunlight poured through the hospital window, Baba looked at him and said something new. You are not my son, but you're my boy. Jacob smiled. Yes, Baba. Then Baba looked toward Andrew and Juliana, who were standing at the door. He blinked. Andrew? Andrew gasped. Papa? Juliana? Juliana burst into tears. She rushed into the room and held his hand. You remember? Baba smiled weakly. Why are you crying? Andrew dropped to his knees. You're back. Jacob quietly stepped aside, heart pounding, tears gathering in his eyes. He had brought Baba back to life. But would he now be forgotten? Jacob stood quietly by the hospital door. Andrew and Juliana were crying, hugging Baba, laughing through their tears. Doctors and nurses watched in amazement. The billionaire who had vanished without a trace was now calling his family by name again. But Jacob, he felt like a shadow. For 2 weeks, he had cared for Baba like his own blood. But now that Baba's memory was back, would he still remember him? Would he still need him? He wiped his eyes quickly and turned to walk out. Jacob. He froze. It was Baba. Jacob turned slowly. Baba was sitting up now. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clear. Come, my son. Jacob walked back, unsure. Baba extended his hand. You are not my grandson by blood, but you are my gift. He looked at Andrew. If not for this boy, I would have died on the roadside like a stray dog. Juliana covered her mouth and wept. Baba's eyes returned to Jacob. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Jacob sat by Baba's bed and told him the whole story. He told him about his parent show they left for the market and never came back. How no ransom call ever came, how the landlord threw him out, and how he ended up under the Oshodi Bridge with just a wrapper and a photo. How he found Baba lying by the road, barely alive, and how no one helped. He told Baba how he fed him every day with money from carrying blocks, even when it meant he couldn't eat. Baba closed his eyes tightly, tears escaping from the corners. When Jacob finished, there was silence in the room. Baba finally opened his mouth and whispered, God sent you. He turned to Andrew. This boy saved me, and for that, he is my son. Back at the mansion, Jacob didn't return to the bridge again. Andrew had his clothes replaced, his hair cut, his health checked. But even with all the comfort, Jacob never stopped asking, what next? Where do I belong? He didn't want to be a burden. He started helping out at the mansion, following Andrew to his office at Donald's Tech, running errands, even assisting Juliana with food drives in local communities. Baba didn't let him out of sight. "I sleep better when Jacob is near," he'd say. Andrew grew fond of him too. "I don't know what my father's fate would have been without you," he told Jacob one morning. "You're not just a guest here, Jacob. You're family." But just when things were beginning to settle, something happened that nobody saw coming. One rainy afternoon, Baba called Andrew and his lawyer into his study. Jacob sat quietly in the corner, sipping juice. Baba pointed to a large wooden drawer at the edge of the room. "Open it." Inside was a black safe. Baba typed in a code. He pulled out a red folder and placed it on the table. "This was the will I wrote before I went missing." Everyone leaned in. Baba opened it slowly, revealing pages with fine print and a few signatures. "I never finished it," he said. "I never signed the last page." Andrew's face went pale. "Why?" "I was still making changes," Baba replied. "But the biggest change I never got to make was to add Jacob." Jacob froze. Baba looked at him. "You see, when I was lost, I didn't just lose my memory. I lost my pride, my name, my power. But in my worst moment, you gave me dignity. You gave me hope." He turned to the lawyer. "I want Jacob added to my will officially, as my adopted grandson." Jacob's cup dropped from his hand. Juice spilled across the marble floor. The next week, Jacob sat at a long table inside a private courthouse. Baba's lawyer submitted the documents. Juliana smiled warmly at him. Andrew patted his back. "You're no longer just Jacob from Oshodi," Baba said proudly. "From today, you are Jacob Uche Donald." Tears filled Jacob's eyes. He remembered the photo in his bag, his parents, the only people who ever loved him until now. He felt their spirits smiling. He was no longer homeless. He had a name, a future, a family. Years later, Jacob gained admission into a top university to study aeronautical engineering. Baba insisted on it. "You were meant to fly," Baba said. "Now go fly." Juliana and Andrew celebrated every exam result with him. He no longer carried blocks. He now carried books, dreams, and purpose. By his final year, Jacob was recruited by an international aerospace company. At his graduation, Baba wore his finest agbada, even though his legs had grown weak. He refused a wheelchair. He stood tall, watching Jacob receive his certificate. Tears rolled down Baba's cheeks. "This boy," he said to the woman beside him, "once fed me when the world walked past." He turned to Andrew. "Now, I can die in peace." But life had one more twist. Jacob was 25. He had fallen in love with a woman named Cynthia Lawyer, kind and graceful. Baba adored her. "She reminds me of Sophia," Baba said once, placing his wrinkled hands over Jacob's. Baba spent the last year of his life urging Jacob to marry. "Let me see my grandson's wedding before I go." Jacob promised him. They picked a date. Invitations were sent. Preparations began. Just 5 days before the wedding, something happened. Jacob had gone to check the wedding suits when Andrew called him. His voice was shaking. "Jacob, come home." Jacob ran. He burst into Baba's room. The nurse was crying quietly in the corner. Juliana sat at the bedside, holding Baba's hand. Andrew stood by the window, his face in his hands. Jacob rushed forward. "Baba!" But Baba didn't respond. He was lying peacefully, his hands folded over his chest, a smile still resting on his lips. He had passed in his sleep. A soft wind brushed the curtains. Jacob collapsed on the floor, crying like a child. The sun rose slowly over the Donald mansion, but inside, the air was still and heavy. Baba was gone. The man who once lay helpless beneath an Oshodi bridged the same man Jacob fed with his last naira. The one who later became his second father had passed away just 5 days before Jacob's wedding. The home, once full of laughter and wedding plans, now echoed with grief. Jacob sat in Baba's room, wearing the same clothes he wore the day Baba died. The nurses had tried to get him to eat. Andrew had spoken to him 3 times. Juliana even offered to postpone the burial so he could rest. But Jacob said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on Baba's walking stick still leaning against the wall. The burial was dignified, private, and painful. A long line of black cars stretched across the street. Men and women of influence came from around the world. The governor sent a representative. CEOs sent wreaths. Churches offered prayers. But Jacob didn't want ceremony. He didn't want speeches. He just wanted Baba. When they lowered the white casket into the earth, Jacob's body trembled. Andrew held him. Juliana wept openly. Cynthia stood close by, but Jacob couldn't look at her, not yet. As they tossed soil over the casket, Jacob dropped something in. It was the photo, the one he'd kept since he was 18, the only picture he had of his parents. Now, it rested with the man who had given him another life. 3 days after the burial, the house remained quiet. The caterers had been cancelled. The wedding venue manager sent a message offering condolences. Cynthia's family called to check in, but Jacob didn't answer. He stayed in his room, staring at the suit Baba had custom-made for him. It still smelled like the day they picked it up together. "Wear this proudly," Baba had said. "You're not a boy under a bridge anymore. You're my son." But now, what was the point of getting married if Baba wasn't going to sit in the front row? If he wasn't going to walk beside him, shaking hands and smiling? Jacob wiped his face again. The tears were dry now, but the ache in his chest remained. A knock came at the door. It was Andrew. "Jacob," he said gently, "can we talk?" Jacob nodded without turning. Andrew sat beside him and sighed deeply. "You know, Baba was the one who begged you to get married before the year ran out. He said, 'Let me see my grandson start a family with my eyes.' Remember?" Jacob's voice broke. "He was supposed to bless our wedding. He was supposed to hold my first son." Andrew nodded. "I know, and I miss him too, but you can still honor him." Jacob turned to look at him. Andrew continued, "He didn't save you to see you freeze. He gave you his name, his heart, and this house. You think he would want you to cancel your future because he's no longer here?" Jacob stared at the floor. "I don't want to get married and feel empty." "You won't," Juliana said gently, entering the room. She held something in her hand-sealed envelope with Baba's handwriting on it. "He gave this to me the night before he died," she said. "Said it was only for you." Jacob's hands trembled as he opened it. The letter. "My son, if you're reading this, then my journey is done. But I want you to know I didn't die afraid. I died fulfilled. You fed me when I was forgotten. You gave me warmth when I was cold. But more than that, you gave me a reason to fight. That wrapper you wrapped around me, I kept it. They don't know I hid it beneath my pillow every night. I wanted to see your wedding. I truly did. But if God says my part is done, then I'll wait to see it from heaven. Don't delay your joy because of me. Let your children know they had 2 grandfathers. Let your wife know she's marrying not a boy, but a man I am proud to call my grandson. Go marry your Cynthia, and wear that suit. I'll be watching. Baba." Jacob clutched the letter to his chest and broke down. But this time, the tears were not just of pain, but of peace. 5 months later, the sun was bright and golden. Guests arrived from across the country. Paparazzi waited at the gate, but Andrew had arranged for a quiet ceremony. At the garden behind the Donald estate, white roses lined the aisle. A chair with a photo frame of Baba sat in the front row, draped in white. Jacob walked down the aisle in the same suit Baba had given him. Cynthia stood under the arch, tears in her eyes as she saw him. Her lace gown shimmered in the light. Juliana and Andrew stood proudly behind, and as Jacob took her hands, he whispered, "He's here." She nodded. "I know." The officiant smiled. "Do you, Jacob Uche Donald, take Cynthia Okafor as your—" A breeze swept through the garden. Petals flew into the air. Jacob smiled softly. "I do." 3 years later, the walls of the nursery echoed with gentle lullabies and baby laughter. Jacob stood beside the crib, rocking his newborn son, Ned Anderson Donald, in his arms. The baby's eyes were wide open, his tiny fingers curled around Jacob's pinky. Cynthia sat nearby on a white armchair, her hair in a loose bun, smiling with quiet joy. On the wall beside them was a large framed portrait. Baba, in his signature white agbada, smiling gently. Jacob walked to the photo, lifted his son slightly, and whispered, "That's your grandfather, the man who gave me the chance to be your father." Shortly after their wedding, Jacob used a portion of the inheritance Baba left him to launch a non-profit, the Baba Donald Foundation for Lost Boys. Its mission? To find and rescue homeless children under Lagos bridges. The first project was simple: build a temporary shelter near Oshodi for kids who, like Jacob once did, carried blocks to survive. But it didn't stop there. Within 2 years, the foundation opened homes in 5 different states. Children were rescued, enrolled in school, and mentored. Some learned to code. Others danced. Some even dreamed of becoming engineers just like Jacob. Jacob made it a rule. Every child who entered the program got a free photograph taken and framed. "Every child deserves a memory," he always said. "I grew up with only one." One rainy evening, Andrew called Jacob to the main office of Donald's Tech. The building had changed bigger now, with a digital screen showing the Baba Donald Foundation on one side. As Jacob stepped into the office, Andrew smiled and said, "Sit down. I have something for you." He handed him a box. Inside was a brand new gold-plated nameplate. "Jacob U. Donald, CEO." Jacob looked up, stunned. "Me?" Andrew nodded. "It was always meant to be you. This company started with my father's dream. You saved him when he had nothing. You reminded him of what mattered. And now, I'm handing it to you, not because you're his grandson by adoption, but because you're the most deserving person I've ever met." Jacob swallowed hard, the weight of his journey pressing on his chest. "I'm just a boy who used to sleep under a bridge." Andrew smiled. "You're not just anything. You are Jacob Donald, the boy who fed a dying man and unknowingly saved an entire legacy." On Jacob's 30th birthday, something unexpected happened. A visitor came to the house, a man in his 50s, wearing a faded shirt, tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to say this," the man said, "but I believe I knew your parents, Sophia and Uche." Jacob froze. "My name is Benson. I worked at the same taxi park with your father," the man continued. "I was there the day he and your mother were taken. I saw it all, but I was too afraid to speak. I've carried that guilt for years." Jacob's hands trembled. The man reached into his bag and pulled out an old envelope, yellow with age. Inside was a letter, written by Sophia. It was never sent. It read, "Jacob, if you ever see this, know that we love you. We are praying for a miracle. Never stop being kind. Never stop being strong. Never let the world turn your heart cold." Jacob dropped to his knees and cried like the boy he once was. The circle had come full. Today, Jacob's story is told across Nigeria. His foundation now spans 10 states. He speaks at universities, churches, orphanages, always telling one story: "I was not rescued by money. I was rescued by love. One act of kindness saved a billionaire. But that same act saved me, too." His favorite quote is etched outside the foundation's head office. "Kindness doesn't need a last name, just a willing heart." Jacob sat on a stool under the same Oshodi bridge, not because he had nowhere to go, but because he had returned with food packs, clothes, and a van filled with hope. A small boy with tear-streaked cheeks sat alone, hugging his knees. Jacob walked up to him. "Are you hungry?" he asked softly. The boy nodded. Jacob sat beside him, handed him a plate of jollof rice and a chilled bottle of water, and as the boy ate, Jacob smiled. "Your story is just beginning. What is your view about this story? Where are you watching from? If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories."